I just have a few points that I'd like to make about mulching based on things that have been said today. But are there specific questions that folks have?
I was thinking of doing more mulching, I'll do it on some of my bigger crops, more with plastic, but if you use organic matter, I'm worried about rodent buildup and slugs.
Yeah, okay, rodents and slugs, we can definitely talk about that. It's in there, I think. Yes, what was your question?
Yeah, and if you're using straw, how deep do you feed to?
Too deep for raspberries. That's how that is. Yes.
Raspberry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it would help to have something.
Do you have any
like
issues
newspaper
with
Big time.
cartoons.
Okay, got it, yes.
if you're using straw or like when arrive, you're knocking that down. Funguses affecting the stalks as other of the plant that you put in.
Okay, yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, in line with that, the most contact creating
Creating issues?
issues.
Okay, those are all great questions. Okay, so we actually do have a lot to talk about with mulching. That's good. So I've only got these 2 slides because there's only a few things you need to see. I'm going to start with one thing that hasn't come up, but which came up earlier today, which was this question of using oat straw or rye straw versus using hay. And this is a non-research based perspective. This is just based on using both kinds of mulches in a lot of trials and also on our own farm. And I just want to offer a couple of perspectives on those 2 things. So the pictures that we have here, this is actually oat straw that was applied to a garlic field this year. So we finally found a decent source of oat straw. The grower assured us that it was completely seed free and everything had gone perfectly with harvesting those oats. So we bought the whole bunch of it. This is the day that we applied it. And then this is 1 month later. So this was in like late September. This was in late October. And you can't see it in this picture, which is really interesting because I walked out and went, oh, I said something different than, oh no. And that's just looked like a lawn. So it was that time of day where the light was just hitting it perfectly and it was just fluorescent green. So I was really grateful that this was oat straw and that it had been applied in the fall because I nearly seeded the worst weed problem I've ever had in my entire life. But fortunately, fingers crossed, all of those oat seedlings are dead now, and I now just have a layer of mulch. So, we talk about the idea that hay is always weedier than your grain straw, but oftentimes, and we inspected the bales and we're like, okay, yeah, this looks pretty good, but it was a mess. So just keep in mind that A, if this had been rye, we would be having a disaster. B, if we were using it in the spring, this would have been a disaster. So that's just a cautionary tale around the use of straw. So that's one thing. It got mentioned earlier about the use of hay. The one thing that didn't get said was whether or not you're using hay or straw. We always wear PPE for this, and not just because of the mold, but also because the particles of hay or straw getting into your lungs are really, really bad. So if you've never done this, we're using a bale shredder here, so there's a ton of dust, like exponentially more. But even if you're rolling these out by hand, the amount of just silica dust that comes off of straw is really, really bad for your lungs. So we always wear an N95 mask and ideally goggles, especially for me, it really irritates my eyes. So I look super cool when I'm doing this job, but I'm generally protecting my whole head when I do this because it's just a lot. Those are my 2 comments about that. And now I'm going to move to the next slide.
I got one question. Why don't you use wheat straw instead of like later straw? Because wheat straw, you're cutting it before it's gone to seed.
So the question is, why don't we use wheat straw?
No, bleach.
Oh, bleach
Straw.
Oh, what do you mean?
You cut the straw in June before, just as it's starting to pollinate. So you're not getting the rye seed.
Oh, I just don't have anybody in my area that's doing that. And we're not making our own straw.
Yeah, I raise it. That's why I was wondering.
That's a good point. And there's
and
actually
there are other people that do it in our area.
yes. And depending on where you are, There are vegetable growers that are growing their own straw,
Yep.
because of that, and there's also, oh, what happened? I had one more slide.
Oh,
Oh, well.
you could have
Well, I was
advanced
gonna-
it.
Oh, no, it's a PDF thing, so
Oh,
it's just a
all
little
right,
bit
let's
weird.
go back to
Actually, let me
that.
see,
Hold
it's
on.
okay, don't worry, let me see if I can advance with this.
Okay,
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah, because it's a PDF set, because I
okay.
was trying to make them
Do you wanna
small.
go back to that?
Yeah,
All right, let me just advance it. for
I
you.
know, it's kind of awkward, you can go into presenter view.
It's super awkward.
I know. I was trying to
There we
make it
go.
small enough to
There we
email.
go, there we go.
So, all right, so back to these questions about other things that came up with mulches. So, one of the questions was, how deep do you want it? Really deep. So, it's always deeper than you think. So with the garlic, which was where you're really having it, the garlic grow through the mulch, or when you're doing other crops where it's directly contacting, we're looking to get between 2 and 3 inches of packed material. So that goes on as 6 to 8, sometimes 10, depending on how fluffy it is, inches of material that then gets packed down to that short amount. And the goal here is that you're never seeing light through that, right? Because if you're starting to see light, then you're gonna see weeds. So it's a lot of material. We are using about 1 round bale, I'm using 4x5 round bales per 150-foot bed. When we're going in between the beds. So when we're doing it this way, that's about 1 round bale per 150-foot bed. It's more than that when we're going over the top of the bed. So we're talking like huge amounts of biomass.
So you're shredding it before you put it in there.
Yes. Yep. You don't have to. I work with a lot of growers that are not doing that are using either square bales or rolling out round bales. I do not have the physical stamina for that job. So that is not what we're doing. But yeah, shredding it, especially if you're using it in plastic culture. So what we're doing is we're forming the beds. Ideally, you're getting that hay or straw down within a day or two, because right after you've made that, you've got all that exposed ground, and the goal is to cover that up, be back in darkness as quickly as possible. So you're getting that material down, and then you ideally want to clean that off of the plastic relatively quickly, because it also tends to adhere to the plastic and doesn't want to leave. So we also broom this off, but all that is infinitely quicker than spending the whole season weeding, right? Because this system is pretty closed.
Can I make it, that's it, the closed system. That's a really important thing about any type of organic
Yes.
mulch. If you're using it in a field system or with crops that are potentially susceptible to Phytophthora, this can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
And for fruit crops, that's what we struggle with. So raspberries would be that's one of the reasons we don't use heavy mulch, is because they're super prone to Phytophthora. And any kind of opportunity where we get, the weeks of rain in the middle of the summer, this won't dry out, has no hope of drying out, and you can lose a whole row. And even wood chips, we really use organic mulches very, very sparingly with rosaceous crops, strawberries and raspberries specifically. They're just really vulnerable. So you can use them, but from a barrier perspective, they don't work as well, this organic mulch. So we use inorganic mulches. We use fabric mulch out in the field, and it's expensive, but it has, a lot of people are using that to great effect. And with blueberries even, and fairly good sized plantings, it's saved a ton of labor and worked quite well. And I was worried about with blueberries that it would heat the soil up too much, that the root zone would be too warm, but it doesn't seem to have had that effect. So it's also not perfect though. Inorganic mulches, you get stuff growing on top of them. You have to manage them. It's still a problem or a challenge.
Yeah, it's a little hard with the raspberries, if you don't know where the next year's stuff is gonna come up too.
Well, you do know that you only want a raspberry row that's about 1 foot to 18 inches wide, so you can put it there and try to manage that stuff within the row. So that's kind of what people are doing. They're not putting it right over and having things come up through. It's leaving a strip that's the appropriate width.
That makes sense.
Yes,
Just thinking outside the box a little bit. I tried mulching the garlic, and then I've got a pretty good heavy seed bank, so I was having trouble.
Yeah.
And of course, then you can't till it or cultivate, it, you can't do anything with it. So we're blessed enough to have every kind of soil you could think of, and we have dead sand. So I went and scooped up dead sand and literally put 6-inch wide, 2 inches thick on top of the garlic. And that worked great for in row. Really almost no weeding, hand weeding it at that point, there was side cultivating,
Yeah.
worked well. The other thing is just for raspberries, we fenced in our raspberries, and this is not fields, okay, but just the concept. And we put our layers in there and a couple of ducks, and they were super clean. And,
Yeah,
you think that they, and, if you cut the wings of the chickens, you cut, some people say cut one wing, but if you fan it out, you just cut the edge of the wing of the feathers, and they can't fly up, so you don't have to worry about them eating your raspberries. We did it thinking for the Phytophthora and, or the spotted, the two spotted.
wings.
We were thinking they'd go into the, whatever was there and maybe get larvae or whatever. I don't think that worked, but weed wise, clean as a whistle.
Yeah, people use that for mummy berry control, because they'll get the mummies, and I have heard of geese, working in.
But it wasn't a huge amount of bird. It was
Yeah.
like 10 for 75 by 25 area. So, multiply that out. It's not, you could probably do with a movable pen.
Just have to make sure you've got 90 days before harvest that you're doing that. That's your food safety, your ISMA regulations.
Okay.
So just be aware of that, but it could work depending upon which crop you're, using.
Well, an eagle came in and wiped them out.
Oh, there.
So,
90 days ahead of time, right?
yeah, so now they're all encaged in and not at the raspberry, but it did work.
Eagle.
Yeah.
They're a lot smarter than hawks.
So you mentioned slugs too, and slug control is a real problem with strawberries, because we use a lot of straw and strawberries. So one thing you can use for an organic is iron phosphide, which is Sluggo. And remembering that slugs, mollusks, lay their eggs in the latter part of the season. So from mid-August to mid-September, that's the window to make sure you've got treatment down. Not so much in the spring, because usually they're not laying as many eggs, and there's theoretically, there's a lot of water that's gonna kind of dissolve it and move it through the soil profile. So if you can get the sluggo down in mid-August through mid-September, that's like your window of opportunity to control slugs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the question came up about funguses, I think more with vegetables.
Elderberries.
Then we're good on that. Okay. Yeah, but you can keep going. But you'll see, like, if we look at this picture just for a moment, get it in your brain, and we'll keep moving. Nope, you're good.
Should I go to Tarping?
Yeah, you're
Can
fine.
you wait a second? Can you go back one?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so the point I was gonna make about that one before we jump back, you notice that the plastic in that picture was green?
Yeah.
We're doing two things here. We've got heavy mulch down, which is cooling the soil quite a bit. But those are crops that all need to be quite warm. So we're using IRT plastic. So that's infrared transmitting plastic. So we're doing everything we can to warm the soil for that crop. So it's really a hybrid approach, right? It's definitely combining lots of strategies to get to that point. So yes.
How did you apply that?
That's this thing. So this thing here, this is a 95 horsepower tractor. This is not small. So this is a round bale shredder. So what this does, we're putting the bale in with that tractor. It's actually off to the side. It's not a tiny tractor. Just looks like it's putting it in right at that second. But you're loading a round bale into this thing, and it's basically just got a set of shredding paddles in the back. So you cut the strings off, load it up. It's shredding, and then on the other side of this machine, it's just a chute that's
Lays it
depositing. Yeah.
Lays it out.
Yeah.
How'd you do it inside the high?
Tie tunnel wasn't built yet. Yep, so in this other picture, so this is shooting it down and then we're spreading it out. And then in this other picture, we're shooting it here and dusting this off. And then these are caterpillar tunnels. So these are moved every single year. So they're on rebar ground, and they're anchored with dog anchors. But basically, we're doing the plastic, then doing the hay mulch, then putting the tunnel up.
One up now on the right,
Yeah,
did you put your crop?
this is
Did
a high
you-
tunnel. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that one's a big one. Yeah,
Right, so did you? Yeah, how did you apply the mulch that's in there? Did you plant your crops? And then mulch over and let it all come up?
right. So this is a much more intensive system, and I just threw this in because I thought there might be some flower folks and other more intensive system folks. This is what my very special CSA members get in the spring because I love them. This is like not economically viable for the whole season, right? This is like for the special folks. So this is a 30 by 96 foot high tunnel. These are permanent beds. So they're either getting a very small rototiller every couple of years, or I'm broad forking them, or I'm not tilling them at all, and I'm just putting some compost down. The wood chips I'm doing with a wheelbarrow. That is all handwork. Every year.
That explained it.
Yeah, no, this is just super intensive, and this is just basically like my therapy in March, because otherwise I'll lose someone.
What are you growing in that one there?
Oh, it's all early spring greens. So it's peas, bok choy, spring garlic, beets, lettuce. Yeah.
What's the other one?
This is garlic. Oh, this is actually peppers and all peppers, especially all peppers.
So there are some equipment for mulch spreaders for permanent bed systems that are small. None of them will go in a high tunnel, but they're small, so it could, you could change things out. All right, we have to keep moving
Yeah,
folks to
keep going.
Tarping.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah, and honestly, that's like my way of getting in shape in the spring and keeps me. All right, I'll get through this very quickly, Laura, I promise. Oh,
Don't worry, just keep going. Just keep going. It's right here, 2:30.
okay, there we go. Oh, you still have 1 minute, which I will use for tarping.
Go.
All right, so there's just a few points I want to make about tarping. First of all, what is a tarp? So we're gonna skip right past that. We don't need to know. So when I say tarp, I am talking about silage tarps, right? This is UV stabilized, 6 millimeter thick, black on white plastic that you can use for a series of years. And these are generally being used mostly for weed control in season, right? The few things we've learned, just quick take homes. This is a terrible idea over the winter. If you want to protect all of your perennial weeds and make sure they're really happy in the spring, put a tarp down. So don't do that. Yeah, I think that the picture on the left, I did not create that picture, is really just holding a bed in place. So that's the other thing that we use tarps for, is if you happen to have a window in the spring that is perfection and you can get out and get garden beds ready for your early stuff, do that. Like, let's say we get a dry period this March and you can get out and do stuff, do that, put a tarp over it. You're basically holding the moisture exactly where it is. Even if it rains, snows, whatever, you can take that tarp off and resume. So it's a way to pause the season, which has been super helpful with the weather that we have in the spring. So that's another great use that isn't weed control, but mostly we're talking about weed control. They're used in high tunnels. Some people are using landscape fabric like tarps in tiny areas to try to do longer term weed suppression. And these are the questions that we're trying to answer. So we're basically doing a program right now where we're really looking at tarps for nitrogen reasons. But the other thing is that, you know, tarps are basically one of those tiny hammers that we heard about this morning, both of our speakers. They're a way to augment tillage. They're a way to augment herbicide use. They're a way to augment all your other disruptions to weeds. So you're really trying to find windows that you can use these in. I work with farmers that are literally putting them onto harvested fields in order to break down that matter so that they can move in with another crop, and that's working great. Killing off overwintered cover crops if you're organic is another great use of these. And then finally, they mineralize nitrogen because you're heating up the soil. So that's the part that we're going to be looking at. One of the caveats, if you have a field that has ponds in it, so like low spots, good luck ever getting that tarp off that field, right? So short of cutting holes in it and draining the water into the field, which defeats the whole purpose, it's really hard. So you have to really look carefully at how your field is. If you have a lightly sloping field, fantastic, right? You get the water to slowly come off, that's great. But if you've got ponding issues, these do not help you. So this is really what we're looking at. We're looking at some of these nice issues around nitrogen this coming year. Just because we're talking about weed control, this is a picture of what a tarp did. On the left, this is untarped, beautiful field of chickweed. On the right, nice clean soil.
How long did that take?
So that's a great question. And then I'll pass it off to Laura. This is a great question to end on. The amount of time a tarp takes depends on the temperature of the environment. So in the middle of summer, you can generally get a tarp to effectively kill weeds in 3 to 4 weeks. In the spring, it's going to take 6 to 8 because the soil is cold, biology is slow. But basically, if the soil temperature in that first centimeter is getting hot enough to be in that lethal zone, you're germinating and killing weeds. And you can tell. We'll go out and actually just look under the tarps and see what's happening. You just peek, and if there's still weeds that are white thread, you need to put it back down. So,
And this is using the silage tarp.
yes, and you've got the black side out. Yes, yeah, absolutely. But it's a great tool, and it's super. Well, it's not super easy, but it's relatively easy, right? One other caveat, and then I'll pass it off. I swear. Is you want to create tarps that are the size that you can handle. So we have found that we can generally handle 3 to 4 beds and 100 feet as a really easy size. So then you can fold them to the middle and then fold them to the middle. And then you drive a tractor with a pallet out, flop it on the pallet along with all the sandbags and drive out of the field. Bigger than that, and you start to really not like your life choices. So yeah, just creating tarps that are bright and coming up with a good way to move those tarps around is really important. And you want to store them.
You're sandbagging them down.
Oh yeah, that's another thing I should just mention. So you'll always see piles of sandbags in every picture with tarps because you need to have a sandbag, depending on how windy you are. But yeah. So about every 10 feet. Water around the edges, around the edges, about every 10 feet for a very bad windstorm. That'll hold 60-mile-an-hour winds. That's my definition of bad. If yours is worse, more sandbags. You can also, let me see, I think I have a picture here that has it. Maybe not. You can barely see it.
But see, she's also got them in the middle, which I would definitely
Yes, in the middle. And sometimes water is your friend. You don't want the whole thing to be full of water, but there are growers that will water the tarps immediately because you can, get water into the beds and that can help too. But yeah, it's something to consider. And as with tarps, I mean, like, every once in a while one goes somewhere. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna pass to you
All right,
before I
we're just
allow
gonna
any more questions.
Quick, and we can try to do
Okay,
this.
while Laura does that, are there
Yeah.
any more questions? I love tarps. I think they're great. If you haven't tried one and you're interested and you live in an area with dairy farmers, if you just go visit a dairy farm, they might have some holes in them, the silage tarps that are left over, but you can probably find a piece that will work for you. Just give it a try, see if it's something you like before you actually buy nice tarps, because there's lots of options out there.
Can you use the tarps that you buy in like a farm store?
Well, they're porous, so they're not the same, impenetrable substance. And they tend to not be UV stabilized, so they tend to break down pretty quickly, actually. And then you end up with little bits of tarp all over the place. So yeah, that's the better option.
So have you ever tried boat fabric? It's the fabric they put down as
Yeah.
the base?
Boat fabric? Is that
Yeah.
the thing that you do?
I've
it's
heard of
black.
it for people are using that instead of the landscape fabric.
Yeah, it's
It's
heavier.
wider.
It's heavier,
Yeah, allows the wa-
wider.
yeah, allows the water to go down. through,
Yeah,
and I can use
Yeah,
one
it has a
instead of
different
yours.
weave.
Gotta be careful of the ones you get. Some stop water from going through and some let the water through,
Yeah.
depending on what you want.
Belt, and then there's the weave.
Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right.
don't do the felt, the crabgrass loves the felt.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's all that kind of non-organic, inorganic mulching kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, paper, although that's biodegradable, different kinds of plastic. Yeah. That can all be used. So I started this project because of a farmer in Fulton County or Montgomery County. And he was having problems, and actually a lot of, growers are having problems with strawberries because of soil-borne diseases and these things that it just does not allow. And we did a survey to try to prove this, and we found, along with all these other things, that the primary limiting conditions were disease, but abiotic, et cetera, but weed pressure was definitely high on the list. And there's some weedy strawberry fields, and herbicide injury is also a real big problem with berry crops in general. Are we okay? Okay, so herbicides really hurt berry plants, so people use them and are somewhat satisfied, but oftentimes we get problems. Soil health, another problem with just relying on conventional herbicides. That can be problematic, and also we get occasional buildup of nematodes. Nematodes carry virus, and so there's just a lot of issues. And nematodes can also be, they can live on weeds as well. So there's just a lot of problems. You know, the stuff that we talked about earlier this morning, that's truly the key. If you have the ability to rotate, and if you have the ability to really use cover crops well, that's truly the best thing. But if you don't, and you have to try to find other ways to manage these problems, that's when you might be able to think of some tarping or ASD. And actually ASD is just experimental, so I'm not really promoting it, I'm just telling you about it. So chemical fumigation was something that strawberry growers used forever and ever before about 25 years ago, and then finally even California is not allowed to use chemical fumigants. And boy, all of a sudden we're getting a ton of research into trying to organically control soil-borne disease. Biofumigation is another way that's using a cover crop to till it in and seal it so that the chemicals can be released from the plant and actually kill off soil-borne disease and maybe theoretically some weed seeds, but probably not too much. And this is ASD shows a lot of promise in warm soil regions and small systems like high tunnels, but there hasn't been a ton of testing elsewhere. And this is basically what it does. You add carbon, and we use dried molasses. We use a mustard meal and an alfalfa meal, two of which are very commonly found, easy, cheap. You put it in at high levels, and then you till it slightly into the top surface just a little bit. So this is our rates, basically 9 tons per acre for the molasses and the alfalfa meal, and the Nebraska seed meal is 4.5 tons. You till it in, and then the real tricky part is bringing that field, after all of this happens, to field saturation. You have to soak the whole field and then tarp it, and that's the hard part, right? Because a lot of our fields, so there's apply carbon, incorporate, wetting soil. This took a while to wet that soil to field capacity, and then tarp it for a few weeks, keeping the temperature up, and then you pull it off, you let it gas off. And the theory behind it is that while it's anaerobic, it is building up a whole bunch of microorganisms, and they are letting off toxins which kill other organisms, pathogens. And along with that, they're also killing weed seeds. And we're doing a lot of measurements, but the difference in ASD may be more effective than tarping under aerobic conditions, and that's the hard part. Tarping under aerobic. So ASD is anaerobic, tarping is aerobic. Because soil saturation enhances the decomposition of the organic matter. Anaerobic conditions foster the accumulation of those toxic volatile fatty acids, and that's the stuff that's building up in the soil. And then lack of oxygen suppresses the weed seed respiration. So that's how the seeds might be killed if they are killed. And these anaerobic conditions can result in changes in soil temperature and pH, which again help to kill those weeds. So theoretically, that's what could be happening. Our problem is that we're on the third year of collecting data, and I believe that we just didn't have it wet enough, because we had the first year of data looked very promising, very exciting, and then it's kind of fallen off in the second and potentially the third year, so that's disappointing. This is funded by SARE. And, that's,
That was a great crescendo.
yeah, I know, I was so excited about this one. I'm less excited. However, I do think if you have small fields, if you've got a high tunnel, this could be a really good substitute for using a chemical fumigant. There is real promise there. It's just that you really have to know what you're doing. And this is the first year we did, the first time we tried it, so didn't know what we were doing.
This would work inside of a high tunnel. You could do.
Oh, yes, Ohio State has done a lot of work in high tunnels and they have seen it to be very promising. UMass did some work in high tunnels with ASD and it's looking very good. Some of our farms did not have the big silage tarp. They actually were using just regular mulch. And that actually looks maybe like they had a little bit better because they had a smaller area to get it saturated rather than this whole giant thing. So that might be a better way to approach it. Certainly would be easier than messing around with silage tarps. If we could just put the, till in the carbon, wet it, put that mulch over it, and then you'd have to vent it. You have to vent it and let that gas escape, or you can't put the plants in right away because it'll kill the plants.
Right.
Yeah.
So once you saturate, you don't have to, and get a tarp, you don't have to make sure it stays wet, it'll stay wet because of the tarp.
Well, theoretically, but our soils, the two farms that I work with had such light soils and it just drained away. And when we opened it up, it was moist. It was not saturated. Yeah. So that was like, even though we kept watering it during that period.
How come they don't use CO2?
What?
Why don't they just use carbon dioxide? That
I
doesn't,
don't know.
wouldn't that be a lot
Injecting
cheaper?
carbon dioxide into the soil.
It's good for the plant. Eventually. Good for the oxygen. And it's cheap.
Well, we have to make sure it doesn't escape, so we'd have to inject it afterwards, after it's tarped. I mean, that's the whole idea. When you used to inject those chemical fumigants, you tarp it afterwards.
So
to
you
keep
got
it
all those
trapped.
emitters in there, water emitters, be the same thing.
Yeah.
In the drip line.
Yeah,
You know what? I'll have to look into
That's
that.
a
I
lot
don't know. It
cheaper than-
seems like that
You might
should have
want
been,
to.
4 tons of meal has gotta cost a fortune.
well, brassica meal, yes. The other two, not so much. They were pretty
Alpha meal?
reasonable. Yeah, that was 9 tons an acre.
Yeah, you know how much that costs?
Relative to brassica, it was cheap.
Well,
It was about a quarter of the cost.
Just
So
saying.
anyway, we'll be writing this up anyway, in this next year, so we'll have more information, but. All right, I think we have to unfortunately go back to the big room.
shuffle.
And if you have any other questions, I'll be around at the end. I don't know if we'll still be around at the end. Like half an hour. Again, thank you guys. No, no, that's all right. Actually.
Granddaughter. I put some money aside.
Very sad conclusion.